Hi, everybody online. Welcome. My name is Julia Griffith. I'm the program director for Historic Milwaukee, and I will let our panelists introduce themselves in just a minute. But just as a quick introduction, Historic Milwaukee launched our app-based walking tours starting in 2020, and then it formally launched in 2021. In part because of the pandemic, but also to fill a niche of this request for self-guided tours. And in the process of thinking about that, we also wanted to incorporate into some of our longer running programs, including Doors Open Milwaukee and Spaces and Traces. And we, in Doors Open in particular, but in both programs, had Spotlight Neighborhoods. So thought of the app as a way to have longer engagement with communities that maybe don't have somebody free every week to run a walking tour in person. That's a pretty sizable commitment of time. But the Indigenous Milwaukee project came about, and these are just some of our other tours, because we were regularly getting asked by people, what did Milwaukee look like before European settlement? And as a staff of non-Indigenous people, we wanted to answer that question from the community and not from ourselves, but often, we were getting this question, we wanted to answer it honestly. And then also, and I think the panel will talk about this, some sort of dispel the myth that Indigenous people only exist in textbooks and that they're like not around us all the time, every day, shaping Milwaukee moving forward. And so we saw that Bryan was putting together this amazing map with the Indigeneity Lab, and I emailed him, and it was sort of a project house on fire. It was great from the beginning. So I just want to thank the Indigeneity Lab, which is part of the Department of History in the College of Arts and Sciences at Marquette University. Did I get all the labels? I think so. And then the City Arts Board, who helps to fund running the app, and then in particular the Wisconsin Humanities Council. This project was funded in part by a grant from them. Their funds come from the National Endowment of the Humanities, and their work is done to strengthen our democracy through educational and cultural programs that build connections and understanding among people of all backgrounds and beliefs throughout the state of Wisconsin. So we thank them very, very much for the ability to compensate our wonderful panelists and recorders to share their time with us. And then a special shout out to Here. They were the lovely folks who helped us to record the podcast. So in their sound booth, in their awesome studio in Bayview. And we thank them very much. So I'll turn it over to Bryan and then all of you. And
is it possible to turn around some vacancy too?
Yeah, I think so. But you're gonna have to advance the slides.
Okay, I can definitely do that.
Okay.
So
well, maybe I can do it.
Okay, I'm just going to start with a brief overview for those online of what the Indigeneity Lab is that Julia mentioned. But first, just acknowledging the land that we're on here in Milwaukee, being the traditional homelands of Menominee, but also lands of the Ho-Chunk and Potawatomi and the many other communities that are here today and call Milwaukee home. The origin of the lab actually stem from one of our panel members as well, Dr. Jacqueline Schram, as well as one of our audience members, Dr. John Sue, who is here when students actually, Native students led a active, you could call it a protest, but you could also sort of frame it as an activist event in October on Indigenous Peoples Day of 2020. When they asked the university administration to take seriously their concerns as Native students on campus, but also being a part of Milwaukee, and specific things such as the changing of the Marquette seal, adopting a formal land acknowledgement, both of which have been done, and other student concerns. And so out of that, Dr. John Sue actually approached both Dr. Schram and myself about what can we do for the students on one of these aims. And one of the things we developed was this sort of research experiential learning and getting Native students paid for that experience. And thus was born the lab. And so briefly, I just want to describe the other projects for you before we dive into one specifically, which was the tour with Julia and Historic Milwaukee. So the first one is a biology project with Drs. Michael Schlappi and Dr. Samantha Major. Who is Dakota, who couldn't be with us here today, but she is our lone, I believe, Native faculty member on campus. And the idea behind this is Dr. Schlappe is working on actually reintroducing the original species or strains of wild rice that were indigenous to Milwaukee before industrialization in the 19th and 20th centuries wiped out the wild rice population here in Milwaukee. And so he's investigating the possibility of bringing that wild rice back. And it's a very long, as you can imagine, scientific process that I have no idea all that is involved, but he's working on it. And Dr. Major is actually providing the historical and cultural context behind all of this work with our students. So there's actual students that are in the lab itself working with Dr. Schlappe at the same time that they're also working with Dr. Major outside of the lab. And that's the hope. The hope for the future is a return to wild rice in the area of some kind. A second project is also led by Dr. Major, and she's looking or investigating into Marquette's special collections, which has the major records for the Bureau of Catholic Indian Missions, which is the official arm of the Catholic Church's Native American boarding schools during the 19th and 20th centuries. And so having that collection here makes Marquette a very unique and positioned place to talk about or facilitate boarding school conversations. And so Native students are actually in the archives over the summers, actually working through these records and starting to literally have these conversations internally with Marquette and beginning to have those conversations with communities as well, and hopefully much broader community conversations with the Catholic Church at some point. And then that brings us to the mapping project that Julia mentioned. I can try to bring it up, but for all of you who see the PowerPoint, you might be able to access this URL right here. This was the project that attracted the attention of Julia in Historic Milwaukee, which is basically we want to highlight both the past, but also the present and then the future of Indigenous communities and the ways in which they're shaping, have shaped, and will shape Milwaukee for the future. And so this is sort of like highlighting specific organizations, individuals, and events that have happened. The idea is to populate this map so all you see is basically blue dots at some point. That'll probably take years down the road, if not decades. But at the very least, what we're starting with is the basic building blocks of a narrative of Indigenous Milwaukee. And a narrative that most Milwaukeeans, whether you're at the airport seeing the Brew City t-shirt stand, which continues to populate throughout Milwaukee, everywhere you go, which displays the Indian head and other stereotypical figures of Indigenous communities that talks about their erasure rather than their presence. And so obviously this project is very much guaranteed or directed toward a non-Native audience, because just as much as we suffer from a lack of education about Native American history as non-Natives, something as visible and virulent as this narrative is everywhere around us in Milwaukee. And so we're starting with the sort of bare bones here. And as you can see here, this is sort of like what the entries break down to. It's largely a text describing either familiar landmarks or unfamiliar landmarks and the Indigenous sort of roots, but also the meanings and the uses and the shaping going on right now. And the work for this summer is actually conducting oral interviews with Native community members, which will happen in more of a formal capacity instead of an informal capacity. And so this then brings us to the outgrowth of that mapping project, which is the tour that you are all somewhat familiar with, or why you're here in the first place today. And then I can stop talking. So as Julia mentioned,
We don't clap for that.
just Mark clap for that. So as Julia mentioned, this is the partnership with Historic Milwaukee Incorporated. Both Julia and Grace approached me, and I was giddily excited about doing something like this, because this was the whole intent of the project in the first place, was to reach a very broad public non-Native audience. So this has been an incredible opportunity, and this is sort of the culmination of what we've been able to do. I guess more of a celebration, I guess the tour app is more of the culmination itself.
Yeah.
But this is what it can look like. This is what the tour consists of. I've been told this is probably the longest walking tour.
I think it is, yeah. But it is people gave us great feedback about it after doors open, that they learned a lot, that they really enjoyed the different community members, the different perspectives. And I think anytime you mix students, and it's just a lovely harmonious partnership of a lot of different voices.
It's also a biking or driving tour,
Yep.
so you can do all three if you want. In terms of the actual process itself, as you can see down here, it all sort of occurred within a whirlwind of basically 3 months. From what, about May
Yep.
of 2021 until August, to the end of the creation. And you can see from here all the various steps that took. And then in just a little bit, we're going to hear from our panel members about what their experience was like actually.
Stepping into the booth.
The Here Studios, which is a glorious place, a professional sound recording studio in Milwaukee. Whole different world for me. This is our narrators, as they'll be able to introduce themselves shortly. And the toughest challenge I would say is we have all these different sites. I think we have 27 stops. But the challenge was we just don't want to leave you hanging at each, I mean, like in between all of the stops, because you can actually walk there, drive there, or bike there. And so it was coming up with all of these different transitions. So I think we had a total of like, oh geez, like 40, 50, 60
It was a lot.
entries.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was very involved in a very short process, but it all came together. And you really have to give credit to Historic Milwaukee in terms of the technology, in terms of what they were able to partnership with the app studio in Australia.
Yeah, so it's a company out of New Zealand called Story, but you spell Story with a Q. And it's an extremely approachable platform, both from the build out on our side, but also from the user experience. And for us, that's really important. So it's got the ability for people who are deaf to get the same information if you have sight impairment. There's a really great ability to link to a lot of the firsthand. When we linked to musical performances and interviews outside of just the app platform, things that have happened in the past, and then some of the original source material from newspapers and the like, from collections here at Marquette. So all of that is built into the tool and makes it really a really great way to even, we can't really cover the entire map, so to even just link to your map and then to go broader from the pieces that we were able to include.
Yeah, and the one thing I have loved about this is the map is sort of, it's only able to do so much in terms of like, you can't actually visit obviously these sites unless you do the app tour, but you can also take the map with you in terms of the primary sources and the voices and the collections that come with it. So it's a multi-dimensional tool that this tour app is, which is so much more, I think. And again, the narratives that we're trying to build here. And so very briefly, I'm just going to cycle through some of the sites and then we'll turn it over to our panel members. But the tour does start in Public Market, Milwaukee Public Market, because I start with the tour starts with this narrative talking about that the Milwaukee Public Market is actually built upon native graveyards, and that throughout the populated Milwaukee Sentinel newspapers, you can just see just the dozens of entries that are dedicated to the quote unquote discovery of burial grounds that are literally being desecrated through industrialization. And so what I wanted non-native peoples to really start with is a very sobering reminder that the land they're on is not just Indigenous land, but Indigenous ancestors. And that descendants in Milwaukee today are literally still calling this place home, even though ancestors are buried beneath their feet. And that is supposed to, I intended, don't know if it works, to set a tone for the rest of the tour. And so it goes through various things like the Summerfest grounds where Indian summer was, the Coast Guard takeover in 1971, which is the roots of the Indian Community School. You got the lakefront and the ways in which it was a highway for Indigenous communities in the past. Activism takeovers again in the 1970s. The FBI files about what happened there. Talking about Solomon Juneau, the first mayor of Milwaukee, but his wife, Menominee wife, the one who actually made that possible for him and his roots, Josette. And so you don't need to keep seeing me do this. These are the various sites.
The app.
Yes.
It's free.
So I'll get you there. You can actually download the app right there if you'd like, if you have a QR scanner on your phone or your computer. I don't know if they do QR scanners for your phone or for your computer, but feel free, download, it's free, it's wonderful. And thank you, Historic Milwaukee. But now we should definitely turn it over to our panel members. Do you want, no, you should all introduce yourselves. I'm terrible at introductions.
You want to stop sharing the,
Yeah, we could, or maybe just leave that up. Should we?
yeah,
So they can do that, or
they'll just be small.
never mind, let's, yeah. good call.
Give him a countdown. You got 3.
It's on our website as well.
Oh,
So from there, I guess I'll just open it up to the 3 of you, but these were our 3 narrators for the tour app. And I guess what we wanted to do is sort of give you a sort of just a little, give the audience a taste of what that experience was like for you all and what it is, what this app, I mean, what you're hoping the app can do or what you see the app in its use or its utility for a much broader audience. And then I have a bunch of questions to share with you and hear your answers to this.
Oh. Okay, I'll introduce myself. I have to say, though, I'm not a public speaker, and this makes me a little nervous. And on top of that, Dr. Mark Powless is the instructor for the Oneida language class I'm taking, and I know I have to introduce myself and get that right. So I brought my little cheat sheet. I hope you don't mind, I'm just gonna grade me now. Okay, here's my little cheat sheet. Oh, it's only because I go blank a lot.
you got it.
Yeah, I know. So, and I was thinking, well, if I really slaughter the pronunciation, nobody will know, right? Except for Dr. Mark. So, okay, here I go. Segoli, Swagwegu, Igelhe Diadawala, Kitty Hill, Niwak Sonoda, Ne Oslunige, At Noel, Niwak Doloda, Aniota Aga, and this one I always have trouble with. Lujijitsu Nihe Dwagnage. And that translates to, hello, everybody. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Kitty Hill, and I am a Turtle Clan on Ayota Aga, which is the people of the Standing Stone in Oneida. And I live in Milwaukee. I was born and raised in Milwaukee, so. And thank you for being here.
I don't think I could
Sorry.
read whatever that was.
I know it's all scribbled, sorry.
So Segoli Swagweg, Wak Wanawalat, Igele, Dad Wanlanha, the Hawakashus, Niggets, and with Weneha, what Wahoni Wagat lower down, Kali Oni Aga, Niguan, he Wagadu one joke, Mark Niwak Sanoda was Spooning Day. Negune, we got Sanuni, G, Wagagwini, Wagadatia, Tewe, Nejinu, in what Lestakwa. Neokneo Sanunia, G, and Wedage, Agagwini, Harideline, Kali, when he's still one is slut. So, same introduction, more or less. My name is Deha Wakashus. I go by Mark, Wolf Clan in Oneida. So we're different clans. There's a whole story behind those kinds of things. I'm very excited to be able to be here today. I'm happy to see everybody who's showing up. Can't really see you guys out there, but I know that you're out there. Well, that's awesome. I'm also grateful that every day we get to have a wonderful day.
What great company I'm in. Bonjour, I'm Jacqueline Schram. I'm a band member of Saugeen First Nation in Manitoba, Canada. I feel like I'm still a guest on these homelands, though I've been here since 1990 and have really built my own home and work here in Milwaukee. And I've been at Marquette University supporting Indigenous initiatives since about 2007. So thank you for letting me be here.
And just to iterate as well, Dr. Powless and Dr. Schram, well, I don't know what I'm iterating. They're both doctors as well. So I guess I just open up to the 3 of you. What was your
And we're
experience?
both alumni, I believe, right?
Well, you're
You're here?
alumni.
Yeah,
Yes,
you're
you
here.
are. Can you alumni?
No, I'm an outlier.
Oh, here's another alumni.
Right,
Other
other school here, right.
Mark Denning is with us as well. So for our panel members, can you just tell us a little bit about your experiences with the working with Historic Milwaukee, and I guess the lab is part of this app? And I guess it could be about the actual recording the text, whether the text was, sufficient or enough. I don't know. What are your thoughts? And again, what are your hope is the broader applicability of a tour app like this for the future?
You better handle the applicability question. So,
Ability. I think it's wonderful. I think it's long overdue, and I really, really appreciate and respect the work that you've done and all the students and the other faculty for all the different projects that Jacqueline has really, spearheaded, I think. Dr. Jacqueline, I'm sorry. And the experience was, like you said, a whirlwind, because I got a call one day or a text, and it was from Bryan, I think, or maybe it was Jacqueline. And I thought I was supposed to meet you down at HMI for a walking tour. I had no clue what I was getting into, including this. But it was so much fun. I really appreciate it. And I'm a member of HMI, so it was very exciting. Plus, I'm a history buff. I studied art history, and being born and raised in Milwaukee too, it was very meaningful for me. And the studio experience was hysterical. I wanted to move in. It was like an old hippie pad, Really, it was so much fun. And the Lincoln Warehouse is a really cool place too. So I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. I really thank you for giving me the opportunity.
I forgot all the questions you asked in the beginning, Brian, so I'm gonna piggyback off what Kitty said. Yeah, I thought it was a very user-friendly experience. He said it was a whirlwind, but I felt it was well managed. I did know what I was going in for when I went to the recording studio. I did not know what to expect. It was an amazing, accumulation of different memorabilia. So very cool, because definitely could have spent there all day there looking at different things. Recording studios, you maybe see things in the movies and whatnot. Don't realize sometimes it's just I was gonna say phone booth, but probably people don't know what phone booths are anymore. So a small closet space, soundproof. Those guys were super easy to work with.
Yeah.
We made minor changes to the script on the fly, a little bit of wording here and there that just a little more preferred, but I thought the scripts were written very, very well. I was excited to be asked to be part of it. I've been part of the Milwaukee community down here for only about 30 years, so not born and raised here, not Oneida over recent transplants to this area in the last 200 years. I really felt honored and very, very humbled to be asked to narrate some of that and to add a little bit that I know, or try to shed some insights into things I've learned over time, but really not necessarily my history to tell, although I've taken the time to learn about those things. So share with a little bit that I do know about those things. And you want to wrap all the questions into one? How we see this applied in the future? I mean, that was part of the story to me, and part of what I work on doing when I get an opportunity to present is not just talk about the history, but also talk about the current and talk about the future. Somebody asked me within this past year about a presentation, what are the main points I try to get across? One, there's more than one kind of Indian, and two, we're not extinct. Like that continues to be my two main points to drive home on any presentation I get to give. I think more and more people understand that, but there's still a lot of people that are like, man, we thought you're all gone, or say something in Indian, or what is this? Like there's hundreds or more perspectives and on all these things. So an easy answer isn't easy, I guess, but it's to get those points across. And I do like when we can tie the past to the future and kind of see what that bridge is. I took that a while back in presentations, like we have this glorious and amazing history. Yeah, a few hundred years, it's a little bumpy, but there's been other bumpy points in our history as well. And here we are. I mean, we're even here. We're talking on an app, and we have some of this history is being brought forward, and we have amazing allies. And I think that's something that all of our communities need to continue to work on, is not only cultivating and bringing in allies, but being allies, being open to allies. We get a lot of, number of folks that come through that aren't necessarily interested in allyship, more in extracting things from us. So we're wary of that and protective. But at the same time, when opportunities for great allies come along, I think we should definitely be part of those opportunities. So I appreciate being part of this. The biggest glitch is like, I'll play that for somebody and they'll be like, that person sounds familiar. Who is that? Like, I think it's the other guy, I think so.
Yeah, I'll join my wonderful community colleagues here and say that it was a really welcoming experience, from walking in the door and going into this beautiful kind of private space, and just being encouraged by the staff on hand. It's okay, we can edit, we can move through this. it felt like we were reenacting, you know, some of the oral histories that are so important to our communities. And I was really proud to see this research emerge on the page from Bryan's work and his students. I hadn't seen it up until that point, so kind of flowing on the paper for my section at least was really an enlightening experience. But you know, reading these stories was really a lot about community and activism, and it didn't feel like that in the reporting booth. It was a really quiet experience. So it was important for me to get on the streets and walk this tour and hear the voices telling these stories, past, current, and the future. And I had no idea some of the things that were told and shared. So what a profound learning experience, and such a great platform on which the entire Milwaukee community can learn from and grow from.
So I got a couple questions for you all, if that's okay. We did call it a roundtable after all.
Misnomer. I don't, I'm trying to watch see if there's any comments or questions right in the chat.
Yeah, I
right
don't-
now, So
Are there any popping up?
I haven't seen any, but wasn't watching that close.
I can look.
If you could bring up like the
Yeah.
chat tab, I can kind of keep an eye on that.
So
It's mostly just us looking at ourselves. Anyway.
I know.
I can turn, if you don't want, this is the camera, so if you don't wanna look at
Right.
yourself, I can.
I'm trying to remember too, like that's working
Yeah.
with electronic stuff, like I'm looking over here, but then I notice my eyes are pointing over. I should look up there. Even when you're talking, I gotta look at the camera.
The little owl friend.
So can I ask you all, just about, Mark, you said a little bit about this representation, what it is to be, I mean, like, where do you believe just non-native audiences in general stand with representation of Native folks and community in the present? And that could be, you know, in the national media, that could be locally, however you view representation and why it matters so much, and also the ways in which this app is about representing community and image.
I hope that's not an easy question you're starting with. Dive right in. That's a really good question. I would say that's, I don't know that I've got a figured out answer for that. With a general audience and what we're, you know, what I think is important and the kind of I don't know, the people I spend time with. So we work on these things, we talk about these things. It seems pretty natural to move through being at the Indian Community School with so many tribes represented there in our student body and also with their staff, and the staff I get to work directly with. It's fairly easy to talk about, you know, the homelands here, who's been here. Okay, you guys will take that kind of part. That's not really my piece of it. Oneida, we got transplanted here again, it'll be 200 year anniversary this year. I asked that last year, like, is this a celebration or this is, you know, bittersweet or kind of what is it? We're here, we're still here, we're still working on things. So that's awesome. We're not in our homeland, so there's drawbacks to those kinds of things. And also the same representation in the city. There's plenty of Native folks that understand these sites better than we do, and you've researched it and helped us find out some of those things as well. They don't have access to those areas either. So access, I think, and representation probably go largely hand in hand. We see this land back movement in the past handful of years. Again, with allyship, I don't know that anything's off the table, but land back isn't always about give me all the land back. And some of it's that shared stewardship, that access to things we need, whether it's food or medicines or sacred sites or historical markers, whatever it may be, that being part of it. So I think the answer can go all kinds of directions, but if you can kind of tie representation, if we're not there, if we're not at the table, we're not part of these things, help make those decisions, at least guide the education and understanding around that, representation becomes more difficult. So one of our Haudenosaunee leaders I had heard secondhand had mentioned one time that if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. So I've kind of picked that up. That's not mine. I'm not coining that. It's not trademarking that, whatnot. But it took a while for me to kind of get that, and it makes sense to me. So if you're not, when you have an opportunity to be at the table, it's, you know, speak up, be at the table. Doesn't always mean like demanding things, whatnot, but recognizing that difference and that effort to be represented at various levels, to have more of that control and that say of what happens. If you're at the table, doesn't mean you're going to get your way. Right? Even kitchen table, I don't get the biggest piece of pie. That's not how it works at the table, but I have that opportunity to be there, and kind of put that forward. I'm definitely not the only person who works on that. But then here in the Milwaukee area, I forget how many tribes we have represented here. It's got to be more than 40, 50. Chicago area's got over 100. I think there's all kinds of Native folks live down here right these days. More Native folks live off reservation in urban areas than they do on reservation. I'm not sure the exact numbers in the Milwaukee area anymore. I don't keep track of that as much as I used to. But thinking about all those different things down here, and that's the often referred to this as Milwaukee, as Wayne and Garth would say too, I believe, right? And that's where people pull their quote from. But it's a good land, and I've heard our friends and allies who call this their historical homeland talk about this always being a confluence of diversity, sharing of ideas in different ways, and coming together, a meeting point on their travels from here to there. So I'm excited when that happens. Even at Marquette, we got the chance to talk about that with the mural on the side of the building, with the diversity, with the women of color out there on the huge mural. What an amazing thing. And really applauding Marquette and anybody around here to continue that narrative of that diversity. It's always been that way. Doesn't always seem like it's been that way, but again, to be able to get back to the things that are really important, those essential features of that respect for each other and welcoming space. I'm not completely optimistic, but that's where I want to be. I got the easy question. You guys get the hard ones. So. And Mark at the table here too. Speaking of being at the table around the menu, so you're going to say it?
I just, in reaction to the question, I didn't work on the project at all. Just asked a few questions in the beginning, and to me, it's remarkable. And every town and every city and every village should have this. And I hope it stands as a example of what can be done with engaged allies and a Native community that is fully present at a university, because it is a game changer and changes the conversation. And what I based that on is the land has memories just as we do. And there are places that are important to us. In order for us to have and be in conversation with the land, we have to know about its history. We have to know what it's been through. We have to know how to speak to it. One of our teachings, and we have different faiths represented at the table, and it's so awesome to be at Marquette University because we can freely talk of our faiths. We don't have to couch things as we do in a public university. It's because it's a public university. But nonetheless, as a Medewan person, for me, the land has something to teach us and is everlasting and has been here before us and will be hereafter. And when we're in conversation with it, the lessons that it has to say are so vitally important, but we have to know how to engage that conversation and where to have those conversations. It's just like people, when you go to one place, that conversation is going to look one way and it's going to look another. One example would be the burial places that have been identified. It's amazing that, yeah, we can see it on LAPA maps, which is surveyed before. But what are the attachments and the story of it? I mean, we're talking about place-based education, right? And being present in our studies and with our students. What's interesting to me is ChatGPT, right? It's going to change the face of conversation and papers and how we do research. And I welcome it as one. I do personally. I think it's like one professor said it best. It's like the calculator, what the calculator did for math, what the computer did for math. This is what it's going to do for our conversations. It's going to deepen it. We just know how to work with it, which brings up where Mark is working at any community school and project-based learning. Haven't gotten rid of that. And that's going to be so more vitally important because ChatGPT isn't going to capture the conversations of the land. It's not gonna capture the conversations of a waterworks, that soul to soul, heart to heart kind of piece. I think could represent it. It could one day probably write poetry that will move us. But there are things and markers in our lands and waters that can't be labeled. But we should label them. One of those things is the migration of sturgeon here in Milwaukee, where they're coming in. The area that you started with Milwaukee Marketplace, that was a place of wild rice, and where sturgeon would come in from our waters. And after 180 years of absence, now they're coming back through the hard work of people and academics here in Milwaukee, like folks trying to establish wild rice. None of that is possible without inquiry, and none of it is possible without the human spirit being a part of that conversation with the land and the water. So to me, I'm just gonna kind of put this to rest. This is a remarkable project. And when and where we engage things is, I cannot emphasize it enough. One example, just yesterday, our family had a daughter who unfortunately died in her youth. And I went to her place of burial, and it's there we keep her mound up. And when I went there were a lot of gifts left in and around her burial site. Gifts of glass and toys and things that she would have found important and other girls find important in their life. That's someone that is a teenager and adolescent and young girls in their 20s and 30s who find a story that's in that ground. And that story is very unique to them, and it's special. And they go to a place to engage their conversation and passions and feelings that they couldn't normally have with any human. And I see those gifts lay there, and I think about those conversations, and I think with things like this, that conversation can become to be more engaged, because the more we know about this land, the better and more complex our conversation.
I guess another question that I could ask for our esteemed panel is, being Native, what is it like to call Milwaukee home? Knowing the long history, right, of colonization, but also interaction across cultural, social barriers. But what does it mean to call Milwaukee home as a Native person? Especially, right, for myself being non-Native, that's not part of my world, right? I've been a part of American Indian Studies circles for decades, but I don't think or reflect on these things like you all.
Is it okay if I dive in here? Yeah. Born and raised in Milwaukee. I'm a hardcore old East Sider, which is maybe why that studio reminded me of a hippie pad, but I just have seen so many changes over the years in Milwaukee, and it's really exciting to see all the growth and the changes and diversity, actually. And I remember years ago, I used to take the bus a lot back and forth to school. And whenever we'd go over the bridge, like the Wisconsin Avenue Bridge around 35th Street, I always used to try to envision, this is from the time I was younger, until just a few years ago. When you go over the Menominee Valley Bridge, I always used to think, I wonder what this looked like hundreds, thousands of years ago. How beautiful it must have been being in a canoe, coming down the river, surrounded by these beautiful trees and really a forest. And the bluffs, as I understand it, were higher back then. But I always used to think to myself, they took this beautiful valley and they turned it into a brewery. You know, so it's kind of sad. And then I do recall when I think there were a lot of Hmong refugees resettling here and Vietnamese, and they were fishing in the river, and they had to be told, you know, it's polluted, you can't eat the fish in there. So but yeah, just having been born and raised here, and I have so many memories. There's such a connection to the land itself, actually, and the landmarks. I mean, that's so much a part of you. I had a friend who was from Jamaica, and I always want, it's like, that's what really occurred to me, that she was like an island person. She had an island identity, to be surrounded by water. And then when I went years ago to the Southwest, that was such a different experience for me too, environmentally. It was so vast and this open sky, and I felt very exposed. And I realized at the time, I'm used to the shelter of trees, and I like that feeling. It's comforting to me, you know. But yeah, it's who's it? So Lawrence Durrell, who's a famous author who talked about the sense of place. I forgot what story that was, but yeah, and actually it has been a little bit of a struggle, hasn't it? When you think about it, when I think of the contemporary Milwaukee, my cousin who just passed away last year, he was a Vietnam vet, and when he came back home from Vietnam, he went to MATC, and he was the editor of the Times, the MATC Times or whatever. And I also had friends who I wouldn't participate in this, but in the 70s, I think it was, they participated in the takeover at MATC. And I knew a group of people who actually helped get the Indian Health Board started, and it took literally people walking door to door to Indian families where they knew and taking a little survey. And then somehow they got the ball rolling and they got the funding. So we got the Indian Health Center, which has really been a godsend for the community. It was really needed. And then some of the scripts that we had to read too, I thought, you know what, everybody I meet lately is to bring Indian summer back. Everybody loved it. It was such a great boom for the community and for people in general, and for the, you know, the kids all the kids would bring in for education day, and it really opened a lot of people's hearts and minds, I think, you know, breaking some of those stereotypes. Yeah, and then there were other struggles too, but you know, you just kind of, I think even the Potawatomi Casino, that took a whole group of people to try and get that going, and you know, talk about the treaty rights and things like that. So yeah, I think this is a wonderful project too. I think it's going to do a lot, not just for the Native community, but for Milwaukee in general. So I'm very excited about it.
I'll just say, you know, coming to Milwaukee in 1990 was a culture shock for me. The visibility of my community in Manitoba was significant, so I wondered where everybody was. So it's a good thing I landed at UW Milwaukee, and just tried to slowly make my way to kind of community members and sites. And I think if this app were to be in existence, I think I was sharing this with one of the lab cohort students that, you know, I think that would have kind of helped me gain some footing here. But it took me a little while to find my place and to find the Indian community, knock on doors, started serving on committees and boards, and that helped kind of settle my spirit, because I still am a guest on these lands. I'm a Canadian citizen, but a band member first, a citizen of Saging First Nation, and will be until the end. So so it's an honor to be here and be a guest, and just try to be as respectful as I can. So reading these stories was a privilege. So thanks for letting me be a part of that.
I guess y'all don't mind answering one more question, and then we can turn it over to Q&A if there is any from online or here in the room. We already talked about that. I guess superficially, like, was there anything that surprised you at all, or anything that was, I don't know, from here studio experience to the scripts themselves, or things you might have learned, or things you might have included that we didn't include or could include for the future? Was there anything that, you know, surprised you or stood out to you throughout the experience?
Being in the sound booth, I wanted to belt out a song. It was such a weird, I never did that before. And it was just really, especially being in that environment, I think. So it was really fun. But I'm not going to sing, okay? So no autographs.
I don't think anything that really surprised me. I think it's amazing that it's going. That's surprising. Right over time, you get enough interest in project and people talking about wanting to do something that never gets off the ground. So I don't want to say surprising like any kind of a negative way, but it's something that actually started and continued and went through, and certainly, for all the people who pushed it along, and Bryan likes to kind of disappear in the background, but being the driver of this and bringing it together. Right, everybody, they can't probably see me pointing at people. I think that's been awesome for me. I'm a big fan of community work and community engagement, so I show up when I can. I'm usually busy doing things, and then I'm getting to meet other people from the student council here and other staff members involved in things and community members, and just that to me is a win. But to start to think about what is that representation, what is that next platform, where can we move to, and dare I say, leverage off the things that we've done into something more impactful, and not leverage, again, not in a manipulative manner, but when you start to put things together, where is it going? And even this project, I don't know if there is a map or what the next step on the map is. I'm sure we could sit and talk in community about ideas that we have. Some of it, for me, would be about looking at the names of cities and names of places and look at the origins of those names. Right? There's some comedians talk about, Wisconsin, you can't get all these words you can't pronounce, right? You got Waukesha and Kewaskum, and like, those are our words. Not Oneida words, but they're Menominee and Potawatomi and Ojibwe and Ho-Chunk words and things. So that helps I think bring that place part of it together. And also for me, I'd kind of tag on that last question a little bit. This isn't my place. So when I came down here to finish school, I was on a quick pace to get in and out of town and get it back out of here, and refused to learn my way around because I don't want to become like part of the fabric of the area. Been way more time than I thought it was going to be. So I've become, despite my best efforts, become part of the community. What's happening down here. But our leaders back home being transplanted from what's now, upstate New York out there and over here to what's now Wisconsin. We're here before Wisconsin. They'll talk about sometimes even some of our leaders that are out east yet will talk about in a matter of fact way that we don't have access to our homelands. So one of our leaders traveled over to see the Maori people, and they took him around. They showed him all the places in their creation story where the creator came and sat on a rock or was here or there, showed him all those spaces, and said he had an opportunity to go down in the southeast and talk to Seminole people down there. They did the same thing for him, took them all around, showed them places in their creation story, showed them where the creator was, where these things had happened. And then he said, we can't do that. We're not on our homelands. We talk about it. We can visualize that. You can get a map and draw it out, but to go to those places, we can't access them or they've been changed. Like here, things have been changed so much that there's a difference there. So that's part of it. And it is, but I appreciate you talking about the landmark, because I've heard other people talk about that as well. Like the land's the one that knows all this stuff, right? The land's got all that eons of knowledge. And then it's the people that spend the time with the land that come to understand some of that. We spend a lot of time with the land over the time we've been placed here on the earth. So to be able to bring that back, I think is really important. And me, that's also about that. These days, I talk about it more like shared stewardship. How do we partner on those things and give us space? Let us do what we know how to do, even if we haven't done it for a long time, for various reasons, including it not being allowed for a long time. But we need to bring that back and be central figures in that. So I won't be surprised when that happens either. When it comes together. To the guy who backs his chair up, I won't be surprised when you're the one that helps drive that. There, that's your answer to your hard question. So
I was actually
so you get to figure it out.
I was actually asked, what do you could envision be future projects? What you just answered that.
Did you say future projects?
Or
Reflect on your
surprising, reflect.
surprises? Yeah, I think, I took the tour in spits and spurts, and gosh, it was so good hearing these radio voices and voices that you don't hear publicly. And so I really appreciated, Bryan, how you reached out to community members that we don't hear from outside of their own workplaces, and so that was lovely to be in company that way. But taking the tours in spits and spurts, I mean, I think it's about a 5 mile.
It's
You know,
interesting.
and
Just
I was able to, you know, in inclement weather, stop for coffee, get warm. I'm like, oh my gosh, like our ancestors were like working these lands, harvesting, and in all kinds of weather and distances, and so it really transported me. And again, reflecting on, you know, that how easy I have it. So that was, I shouldn't have been surprised at that, but I was.
So could we open up to Q&A? If
Yeah.
anybody in the digital audience or if anybody in the regular audience has any questions at all?
You gotta play it up, right? Everybody in the past, all the people who are here in the room.
Yeah, so if anybody online, if you want to put the questions in the Q&A down at the bottom, there should be just 2 little chat bubbles and you can just type your question in. If you guys have questions, feel free.
I do,
Yeah.
for any one of the panels. One of my favorite things at universities like this is usually when people warm up with a great preamble. And of course, showing how smart they are, and there can only lead to one answer. And I never appreciated that about college, where somebody sets you up with a question and it's supposed to be the most logical answer or easy. In working on this project, I think that the preamble is very open though. There are forces at work in our country that want to diminish our presence. And we can see that at the Supreme Court level, for example, in Brackeen versus Holland, where the question is, are Native people a race or are we a political body? Being off reservation, I can see forces working to say, well, you can be Native on federal lands, but not on other lands. It's a matter of representation and where it's done. This has already been done by the United States government with the IRS, with taxes. As though those of you may know online in here, if we have a tax refuge on the reservation, you usually have to live on the reservation and be of that tribe. It used to be you could be from any tribe. Then it got narrowed, that definition. And it was, and they used the land as a weapon, our own lands against us in recognition. So that's the bill. And the question is, when you look at this work and as it expands, we have a lot of people here, the faces of our future, those who are not enrolled, those who are a little bit of Native, or maybe their allies who want to know more about us. How do you see this helping them?
Incrementally. I mean, I think it's a big thing, right? It's a big deal. So that was after the September 11th attacks. And then as Haudenosaunee, we've been working on a passport, and we've had a passport across the border prior to that. And then the Homeland Security worked on whatever multiple agendas, I'm sure, but to tighten that up so not just anybody can cross the border and whatnot. And they put us, Haudenosaunee people, I think all Native people, initially, whatever, as a special, in line with other special interest groups. And I don't know if there was a loud voice pushback at that time, but well, we're not a special interest group. We're a nation, you know, I guess we have special interest, but I don't want to get put in there, which then will come and go with the political whim with special interest groups and other lobbyists and whatever, you know, may occur. So we recognize that, and our leaders recognize that those, you know, assaults, micro or macro assaults on our sovereignty and those issues and things like that. So that's the bigger picture. I kind of like what Jacqueline talked about, and I think even for me, coming down in the area here, if it hadn't been for our Oneida Services Office, I probably would have been pretty lost. Oneida, only about 2 hours away, so I was able to go back up every week to work on some things and get more involved in the language, and those are some strengths that help me maintain connection and I would say survive the graduate school experience, which is quite different than living in a rural area. So down here, I am a believer in I take this from my time of working at the VA of the no wrong door. I'd like to see the kind of a no wrong door policy. People are going to come to understand who they are any way they want, and I think it's really difficult when you show up someplace and someone says you don't fit. Where's your ID card? Where's your language? What's your community? Oh, you're Oneida. This isn't your homeland. We've been through a lot of that, right? There are generations of things like that occurs for all sorts of reasons and whatnot. That would be, I guess, my hope out of this, that it opens a conversation up. People can come in and then hopefully find more allies and more supporters that can help them figure out where they fit and how they fit. And so we were working on that with the mental health summit at the VA, and there's a speed of light and there's a speed of dark and there's a speed of VA somewhere in there. They know I tell that joke, so I think it's okay. Maybe it's not. I don't know. I tell it anyway. We were working on it for a number of years now, but that come up in some of the committee meetings because introduce yourselves, and I'm fortunate to have learned some language over my adult years here, and been taught to share when you know share some of it, speak it. The creator I learned a long time ago that really it's the creator wants to hear me say some of them words, so I do my best with what I've been able to come to understand. But there were people on the meeting and on the call that were like, we don't know our language. Can we come to the summit? Well, of course you can. We don't know our clan. Yeah, we don't know our nation. We know that we're Native, but we don't know our nation. So it kind of gets into that area, right, where it's like, do you fit? Do you belong? And there's a large discussion around that. I'm very well aware. But there was that decision as well. We need to be inclusive, and then appropriation, whatever we can figure that out down the road, whatever. Let's get people in. It's on my story. Come mostly come into all this stuff as a young adult. And the route that I came in wasn't like Longhouse, straightforward, whatever. It was all around Powell and Bud Lodge, and a lot of different things until I kind of like figured out where I fit. So every day I'm grateful that opportunity was there and people were patient enough with me to help me find my way around. So I try not to match the length of my answer with the length of the preamble, but I'm getting older, so it kind of gets there.
Yeah, I think it's a different experience being urban Indian too. And a lot of that came about because of the whole relocation thing with the federal government. And it's interesting though, because I think any major city that you go to in the United States, there's always a connection back to your reservation. It's like this route back and forth between Milwaukee and Oneida, a little 2-hour drive or whatever. And the connection is still there. And the local office that we have down here, the Southeastern Oneida Tribal Services Office, which Mark was also a director of for many years, really helped so many people and still does. And we're also celebrating our bicentennial for the Oneida tribe, coming from New York. So it'll be 200 years in Wisconsin. So it's really exciting. And also challenging. I mean, the language revitalization is really critical because it's tied to the sovereignty in so many ways as well. And we get a little nervous about that, I think, because it's challenging. It's a challenging language, but it's also beautiful. And language is so important because it explains your culture, it explains who you are and where you came from. And yeah, I think all these projects are really going to help in the long run. There was something else I thought I did some field work when I was in school with Dawn Tomei at the Milwaukee Public Museum, and they have, I'm sure you're aware of this, they have I think it was Ritzenthaler who did a survey, and they actually have maps of the neighborhoods and the names of Native people who and where they lived. So we were like a little village at one time, even though we weren't all the same tribe, but it's just fascinating. And I think from census records too. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Oh, we're out of time for more questions. That's too bad.
We actually are out of time.
Oh.
Yeah.
So I don't know if anybody online had a question at all, or we can,
We didn't have any.
Okay.
But that's
Well,
okay.
do you wanna, how do you wanna wrap?
Yeah, I would just like to start by saying thank you to all of you for being here, but also just for your time and honestly, you know, we walked up to you here together and I was like, this is gonna be a little weird, and you all sort of embraced not only the eclecticism of their interior, but the experience of walking into a recording booth and kind of being like, okay, we'll try this. And just your open-mindedness to the experience was really lovely, but I enjoyed meeting all of you, working with all of you, and I'm sure we'll continue on. But thank you all for joining us. Thank you for joining us. This, I never fail to learn something new when people are in conversation with one another, and I think this in combination with them. Now I hope everyone goes off and does the tour, because I think if you've done it, you should listen to the conversation and then go do the tour again, because I think it just, every perspective changes your experience. So Bryan had the information. You can download the app. There's information on our website under walking tours, and then there's mobile tours. Yeah, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations, graduates. Keep working on it, please, for those of you not there yet.
Finish strong.
Right.